Hello and welcome to the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. We're live in Gateway Center. Thank you all for being here. And I'm excited for you to be joining us for our panel on New Agricultural Movement and ESF alumni who are working currently in agricultural careers. I'm extremely excited to be here this evening and to have our panelists with us as well. And I'd like to start by just thanking the people who helped make this possible. I'm Paul Hay. I'm from the Newcomb campus, where I'm the Associate Director of the Northern Forest Institute and the Adirondack Ecological Center. And our interests there are in looking at how in our residential programs we can provide a very sustainable dining experience and residential experience. And that led us to look into composting, which led us to the Essex Farm, who you heard from previously this evening. But we also, in looking at this, began to realize the deep passion in ESF student body around issues of agriculture and food systems and sustainability. And to look at that intersection also in the courses, to begin to see that intersection in the courses that we've been teaching and the connections that our faculty have been making as well. And it occurred to us that it would be really a really interesting conversation to bring some alumni back who are working in agricultural fields to speak with students and to talk about how their academic preparation here at ESF informed or led to their current careers in agriculture. So I appreciate all of you being here. Thank you, and I look forward to a rich conversation tonight. Each of the panelists is going to begin by presenting a bit about themselves, as well as their pathway to their current career, and then we'll open the floor for questions and conversation tonight about any issues related to careers in agriculture and how their pathways have led them there. This night would not be possible without a number of individuals and organizations, and that cuts across the ESF campus. And I'd like to recognize them quickly because whether it was ideas or funding or other forms of partnership, all of the following organizations and offices were really instrumental in making tonight possible. That's the Department of Environmental Studies, the Department of Landscape Architecture, the Division of Environmental Science, the Division of Student Affairs, the Earth Week Committee, the ESF Alumni Association, Falk College at Syracuse University's food program, also the Friends of Moon Library, the Northern Forest Institute at Newcomb campus. That's one of the organizations that I'm responsible for. Office of Communications, the Office of Experiential Learning and Outreach, the Office of Sustainability, the Onondaga County Resource Recovery Agency, the Sustainable Energy Club, and the Writing, Rhetoric, and Communications program. And that list represents an enormous number of people, an enormous number of ways in which people helped and made this possible. But in particular, I'd like to recognize Monica Blaisdell from the Division of Environmental Studies, Division of Environmental Science, excuse me. When I first had this idea and began to speak around campus and solicit support, I was recommended by Ann Moore to speak with Monica, and Monica is the one who put all of the reality to my crazy schemes and ideas, not least of which was the catering that we just had for the reception and each of the panelists with the exception of Annie Woods. So I just want to thank you, Monica, very much for all of your help and support and great ideas. So thank you. Clapping is very loud over a microphone. So I do want to take a moment to introduce the panel, and starting immediately on my left is Jessie Lyons of Brady Farms, based in Syracuse, New York. And next to her is Erin Hull. She's the owner of Lucky 13 Beef Farm in Tully, New York. Next to Erin is Annie Woods, who's the owner of Darkwood Farms in Petersburg, Kentucky. And thank you, Ann, for traveling to be here tonight. I greatly appreciate it. And then on the ends is Adrian Trout from Main Street Farms in Homer. So with that, I'd like to turn the evening over. And the format, as I mentioned, is for them to present and then to have Q&A. The way that we'll do the questions is we'll have a roving microphone, and we'll pass that microphone to you so that your question is clear to the room as well as to our live audience. And then we'll pass the microphone on to the next question. All right? So thank you very much.
Hi, I guess I get to start. I'm Jessie, so I'm with the Brady Farm, and I'm probably the least farmery of the group because I work for a nonprofit farm, and it's an urban farm here in Syracuse. So I have my colleague who does most of the hard, nitty-gritty farming work, and I do that alongside her, but I call myself the farm coordinator because it's a nonprofit farm. And we have a nonprofit mission of serving lots of people in the community in different ways. So there's a lot more to my job outside of just getting my hands dirty, as much as I would like to get my hands dirty more. So my background, I'm from Oregon originally and got my bachelor's degree in environmental science. And that was great. I learned forestry stuff. I went for the first almost 10 years doing forest ecology research and restoration in both the West Coast, and there is my partner in crime who just walked in the door. The one who gets her hands dirty, can you tell? So I went from doing forest ecology work on the West Coast and to eventually coming out to Kentucky and doing some forest restoration, prescribed fire work in Kentucky, where I became very frustrated with the disconnect between science and research and land management. And that there was so much good science that people weren't using, but also a lot of land management goals and questions that scientists weren't properly addressing. And the questions weren't, there was this communication disconnect. And I felt a need to have more ecology represented in landscape design and landscape management. So that brought me to ESF as a landscape architecture grad student. So that was a totally different field for me going into landscape architecture. All along my path, I kept going into food. And so that was something kind of niggling at the edges of everything I did. And every invasive species I would pull, I would think, can I eat this? Is this something, what can we do with this thing? So even in landscape architecture, I got to participate in the first food studio that was offered at ESF. So in my work was looking at community gardens and kind of going back to that question, how can we design food in a city in a different way? Where can we find places to plant? Where can we use a city to grow things? So I worked with community gardens on the south side of Syracuse to design their gardens in a way that better represented their values and made it something that more people wanted to participate in. So that led me to cooperative extension. So every state has a cooperative extension. That's where I met Aaron. And so I became an educator there and started teaching about community gardens and urban agriculture. So long story short, that's how I ended up working in my job, was consulting with community groups who were trying to do urban agriculture. And one day I looked out my back door and it's like, man, there's a lot of old farmland. And I'm right on Onondaga Creek, and it just pained me looking at all of this rich farmland that was being turned into parking lots. And I just said, man, how can I do that? How do I go back to the land? How do I just start growing food and make that be my life? So very serendipitously, a couple months later, the organization that I now work for wanted to start an urban farm 3 blocks from my house. And they offered me the job to help run it. So I'm very, very, very lucky, but it was not a traditional path that got me here, but it was an important one. And what I do is a niche, because I think about how food reaches people. How do people eat? How do people interact with the land? What does it take to get people to be at an urban farm and get their hands dirty? What does it take to get people to try to eat vegetables? So that's kind of my niche in the urban farm movement, where I'm a little bit different path. So that's where I am.
My name is Erin Hull, and I own and operate Lucky 13 Beef, and I think I've got some pictures here. They're just totally random. So I am a 1999 graduate from the forestry program, natural resource management. I really had no desire to ever be a forester. I went to ESF and became a forester because my parents and I spent a lot of time in the woods, and my father would point to trees and say, "What kind of tree is this?" And I would always say, "I have no idea." So after many, many years of saying, I don't know, I decided that I would get a degree in forestry just to say, "Hey, Dad, what kind of tree is this?" and have him say, "I don't know." So 4 years at ESF, I now have a leg up on my father when it comes to trees. But I was born and raised in Onondaga County in Tully, New York, which is just south of here. If you've been to the Hyberg Forest, you know Tully. Grew up on a dairy farm. Realized at a very young age that I never wanted to be a farmer. I would never marry a farmer. I would never be on a farm, because when I was in high school, everybody was out on the lake having fun in their boats, and I was on a tractor cultivating corn or mowing hay, and it was not much fun. So graduated college, moved to Idaho, moved back. My husband decided that he couldn't buy a decent hamburger anywhere, so having never grown up on a farm and living on the west side of Syracuse, he decided he would buy a herd of beef cattle. So my grandfather, who was the dairy farmer, and my husband started raising 13 head of Hereford cattle, which are brown with white faces. and being a dairy farmer, dairy cows and beef cows are very, very different creatures. They have different nutrient requirements, that they're just very different creatures. And my husband travels for work, so he's out of town Monday through Friday. So is my elderly grandfather who was raising these cows, and I quickly learned that he wasn't doing it right. So I kind of took over, like most women do. So I took over the farm, decided that I didn't like the way it was going. I changed breeds, so I don't know if I've got, yeah. So I transferred over to Red Angus. So I now graze about 50 head of Red Angus cattle, still in Tully, New York, on the farm I grew up on. Tully's all dairy farms, so cropland is very difficult to come by, so I was only able to start farming because I bought my family's farm. We also do about 500 or 600 acres of cash crops, so barley for malting, hay, a little bit of corn, a little bit of soybeans. Half of our farm is certified organic, half is not. So now I raise the cows, and as you can see, it's a pretty attractive place to live. So that's how I got into farming. It was kind of because I didn't want to. So, but what pushed me to continue the farm was the disconnect, just like Jessie said, her disconnect, was the disconnect that people had no idea where their food came from. Or they were dictating how food needed to be raised, and they'd never stepped foot on a farm. So they're telling us, producers, how we need to raise our food, and we're like, whoa, you need to come out and actually see what's going on before you can judge us. So that's now my passion, is agriculture education and having people out to the farm. I host several open houses at the farm every year so that people can actually come out. I let them in the pastures with calves and babies. We're going to start calving June 4th, fingers crossed. So I like to actually get people out in the pasture, see where their beef comes from. I also raise lamb, just so they know where their food comes from. This picture is to prove that grass-fed beef is not lean. So that is 100% grass-fed cow, and if you know anything about meat, marbling is king. That's just my favorite cow. We're all allowed one pet on the farm, and that's mine. So look forward to your questions later on.
And her beef is really delicious. Her beef is really delicious.
Oh, I broke it.
I don't know how we go to the next. Yeah, thanks. My name is Annie Woods, and I was ESF between 2004 and 2007, pursuing my master's degree in environmental and forest biology. But half the time I was a student at ESF, I actually spent at Huntington Wildlife Forest up in Newcomb, and I worked with Paul. And at the time I was here, I did not even have a thought in my mind that I would become a farmer. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew that I really liked to be outdoors, and I knew that I had a passion for the environment, and I liked science. So I wanted to study biology, I wanted to be outside, I wanted to be in the field, and I was just kind of taking in all this information as a student, but also really learning the discipline of being a scientist, and using data, using information to look at really important questions. During my time as a student, I came to ESF because I really wanted to be in the field and I wanted to be outdoors. And of course, I ended up doing my thesis project, which was like totally data driven, and I was doing GIS and a lot of statistics and mapping. So it didn't really turn out the way that I thought when I started going to school here, but I learned that those were really important tools. And when I finished my degree, I had a really great skill set, which 5 years later, when I became a farmer, really helped me. This is an aerial picture of my farm, Darkwood Farm. I am now in my 6th year of farming on my own. I'm located in northern Kentucky, really close to Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where I grew up. My parents live 5 miles down the road. I actually leased the land, so I didn't come from a family farm. So I knew when I started my farm I wanted to go home. I wanted to be near where all my family where they live, but I had to find a piece of land, and like I said, I'm now in my 6th year of farming, and I'm still a tenant farmer. I'm leasing land. I wanted to talk to you guys tonight a little bit about the path to how I became a farmer, which was after I left ESF and I was working as an ecologist. I was really trying to struggle with the idea of, what was I doing with my daily life? What was I doing for my daily work? And was that having an impact on the environment the way that I wanted to? And, it was hard because the further I got into ecology, the more I was like doing administrative work, the more I was sitting at a computer, and there's value to that. But I really wanted to go out and be on the land, and I wanted to physically be doing something with my body that meant something that actually showed at the end of the day. So I was living in Seattle at the time. I was working at the University of Washington, and I went to a seminar at UW. That was it was a farming seminar, and they had a guest speaker that came in, and she was talking about how to start your own farm. And it was the woman pictured up there on the top right, Siri Erickson Brown. She and her husband own a farm called Local Roots outside of Seattle, and she was just like fielding questions for a bunch of people, kind of like we're gonna do today, about how she started her farm. And she was in her 6th or 7th year of farming, and I was like, oh my gosh, this woman's like just like a couple years older than me. She had studied public policy in school, just finished her master's, and somehow ended up starting a farm. And I was like, okay, like people can do that. You could just not have a farm, then you can have a farm. Like that's crazy. And I had been so interested in the local food movement, going to the farmer's market every week and growing food in my backyard. And any day that I had off of work, I was like going on field trips to farms. I was super into the idea. I was like a farm fan. And I thought, you know what? I should just go work on this farm and see if I could be a farmer. So I sent her an email and I was like, hey, just saw you talk at the college today. Would you hire me? And she said yes, after I went out and interviewed, and I started working on that farm. And so I was learning every aspect of farming. I was harvesting, I was planting, I was propagating plants in the greenhouse. I even ended up managing the local market. We went to farmers markets in Seattle, but the little town we were in was called Duval, so I was doing the local market. And I just loved it. I knew right away that I wanted to keep farming. I mean, the food was like beyond belief, the stuff that I was eating off of the farm. I lived on the farm in this little trailer. I was waking up every day to this beautiful view of Mount Rainier, and I mean, it was just amazing. I worked there for 2 years, and during the winter, they kind of had a lull. They were doing vegetable production, and so over the winter, I wanted to find another job on another farm. First of all, I met a lot of really cool other people on the farm, a lot of other apprentices on the farm, and I just put this up here just to say that I wasn't the only one like with this crazy idea that I wanted to start a farm. There were other people like me too. And actually all the people pictured here are either managing farms or running their own farms today. So this was in 2012, all those people are still farming. But over the winter, I really wanted to get another experience on another farm, so I went to Green String Farm in Petaluma, California. It's run by a farmer named Bob Kennard, and he's the main vegetable grower for Chez Panisse in Berkeley, which is run by Alice Waters, and it's arguably the restaurant that kind of like began the farm to table movement. And Bob is like totally kooky and kind of crazy, but also like super genius. And after he'd been farming for decades, he realized there was a need to get more people back on the land, and he really felt compelled to train up the next generation of farmers. And the way he did this was he took 12 people every season, so like 4 times a year he was turning over 12 new students. So you were like quick in and out, working on the farm every day, and then he would spend a couple hours in the afternoon just like talking about farming techniques and fielding questions from us. So I learned a lot from Bob, but the main thing that he was there to do was to sort of like give us a kick in the pants, to be like, you guys should just go out and farm. You're never gonna have enough money, you're never gonna have the right equipment, it's never gonna be the right time in your life, but you should just go out and grow food, and eventually you'll grow more food and you'll learn something, and then you'll get enough little bit of money to buy the next piece of equipment. And I was just really inspired by his sort of like straight talk on like, just get out there and do it. And that was my group of other apprentices that I was there with. And about half the people pictured here are running their own farms. So for me, doing the apprenticeship at these farms was the sort of like boot camp in farming I needed to feel like I was well equipped to go out and start my own farm. So I moved home in 2014 to northern Kentucky and started leasing a piece of land and started growing vegetables on it. So I broke ground, and like 5 months after I moved home and broke ground, I had bought a greenhouse and put it up and bought a refrigerator. Those were like the two things that I thought I needed most to grow vegetables and be able to hold them and get them to market. And I started going to the farmer's market. And now I actually don't do any farmer's markets anymore. I sell all my vegetables to restaurants in Cincinnati and northern Kentucky, and then I sell through a community-supported agriculture program, a CSA, which has 50 members. So that's what the farm looks like today. There was a lot of like just trying stuff and messing up and learning from my mistakes to get where I am today. And we grow about 60 different kinds of vegetables. It's me, and I have one full-time employee from March through the end of November. And one of the things that when you like leave these environments, you're working on farms with these like awesome people, great mentors, great other team members, and then you like go out on your own and you're like, wait, I have questions. Like, what am I doing? I need to talk to somebody about, you know, these challenges that I have. And so one of the things that I've turned to a lot now is there's a lot of great books out there, like that have really great information from farmers like me who are like 10, 15 years into it, or even 20, 30 years, that have great books out there that I turn to a lot. And besides just the technical aspect, I also look to writers like Wendell Berry. Kristen, you were mentioning him before. I'm really lucky living in Kentucky. I've actually I've been able to go hear him speak and read some of his works, but I look to writers like that to kind of remember why it is that I'm doing what I'm doing, to remember the philosophy that got me into this. And I would say also like just networking with other farmers in your area. There's a lot of nonprofit groups and universities that put together field days to help farmers like me, and it's a great way to kind of keep yourself sharp and meet some other farmers and talk about your challenges together. And you know, if you think you might want to become a farmer, one of the important things for me when I was deciding where to have my farm was, where was I going to have a network of support? And I've lived in a lot of really amazing places across the country, but I just knew I wanted to go home and start my farm. And my mom and dad and my grandparents and my brother and nephews are all there, and everybody comes to help out on the farm. It's like mom comes and washes vegetables. They're just happy to have me home. And you know, being able to see my 14-year-old nephew like come out and help me with mowing or picking tomatoes is just, it's really great to have those one-on-one connections and to know that they're getting some time outdoors, they're observing their environment, they're feeling more part of the community by being on the farm. And I just wanted to mention, you know, when I started the farm, a friend of mine volunteered to come out and help me the first summer, and he liked it so much that he stayed with me for 4 seasons, and he went on and started his own farm in Utah on his own family land last year. And you know, the woman who works for me full-time, this is her 2nd year, she was a graphic designer and decided she hated her job and wanted to go work outside, and she's now 2 years into farming. So even though my farm is very small, I think there's a ripple effect that happens not only to the people that are eating your food, but the people that you bring in to work with you, and it changes their lives too. And I know you guys really wanted to convert some farmers. I'm in the same camp as you. It's possible. It's really hard. There's a lot of challenges, and we'll probably talk about that tonight, but it is very rewarding work. So that's my website if you guys want to contact me after this.
My name's Adrian Trout. I graduated from ESF in 2014 with an undergraduate in environmental biology. And it was at that time that I started to really become engaged with farming. I started farming in 2012 while I was in school. And I was also working on other farms and started a farm with my partner and our friend in Cortland and Homer. And it was kind of like this very a winding path of how, different jobs that I was working while I was doing farming part-time and going to school. And it wasn't until more recently that I kind of see how they all have fit together into looking at it from a food systems perspective. So after I finished my undergraduate, I worked for NOFA New York. So I was certifying organic farms while I was farming. And that was a really amazing opportunity for me to learn about other people's farms. Because one of the most important things that I did to learn how to farm was to go visit other farms, talk to other farmers, network, and be able to ask lots and lots of questions. And I was really lucky to have a very supportive group of organic farmers in central New York. And then as I was kind of wrapping up my time with NOFA, I decided that I wanted to go back to school and learn a little bit more about food systems and kind of how all of those different aspects fit in with my interest of production and agriculture. So this semester, I'm finishing up my master's degree in food studies at Syracuse University. And through that opportunity of being able to go to school part-time while I'm still farming, I was able to do other parts of research that looked at the food system. So my research focused on intermediate markets for beginning farmers and organic farmers around the country. I looked at technology adoption of anaerobic digesters, and also I looked at mental health of organic farmers in New York State through my internship that I was doing with FarmNet, which is with farmers all over the state. They provide free, confidential help for financial and personal issues. So it was kind of all of these different things that have been able to give me a wider perspective of what it is that we're doing while we're farming. Like, how are we impacting our communities? And really being able to engage with my own community. I grew up in the same town that I live in now, in Cortland, and that's really important to me, is I am able to really value the people and the place where I live. And through being able to be in the same place and connect with my own community, I've been involved in different boards with different nonprofits and cooperative extension. So one of the things that is really engaging for me to do as a farmer is to be able to work with these different community organizations. So we have a group called Cortland Food Project, and we work with organizations that are looking at all the different aspects of the food system. So we look at retailing and production, and we look at issues of hunger and institutional buying. And it's this really great group to be able to connect with all of the different aspects and community members in the Cortland County area. And kind of from that, like this perspective of wanting to really be engaged in my community, I decided that while I'm in grad school, I'm going to announce that I'm running for county legislator next year. So I'll be running over the summer, my campaign for a November election. And kind of all of these things I was able to do while still farming. And that's because I have a really amazing crew who work with me. So our farm it's on a 200-acre historic farm, and we do 45 acres of vegetables, and we grow about 50 different kinds of vegetables. We sell through a CSA and at the Syracuse Regional Market, and also to wholesale accounts like at restaurants. And because it's a mid-sized farm, we're able to have people who specialize in different aspects of the farming process. So what I do, I manage all of the organic certification, I do soil management, I look at the crop rotations, and then there's other people on the farm who I'm lucky to have who focus on different aspects, like who are able to fix the tractor when I don't know how to fix the tractor. And be able to fill those different needs. So we have about 25 employees, and about 10 of them are year-round. And to be able to provide jobs is really important for us. So we're really proud of being able to employ people in our own community and to be able to kind of create this network, be able to support the food system development in our own area.
All right, well, thank you all very much for sharing. I appreciate that, and for setting the foundation for what I hope will be a robust exchange of questions. So the goal is to open this up and have it be free-ranging, and are there any topics that are off limits? All right, so from politics to, no, seriously, so in all seriousness, please, so let's dive in. What are people interested in terms of understanding the challenges, the opportunities, the excitement, the rewards of farming? And who would like to go first? Thank you.
As someone who is very interested in potentially farming in the future, I would like to know how you balance, like, say something like travel. I really enjoy traveling with farming. Like, do you feel like you're tied to the land or stuck there? Or do you feel like you have the freedom to take some time off if you chose to?
I guess I'll go first. Because we have cattle, they have to be fed 365. I am really blessed to have an amazing neighbor who is actually a retired pediatrics ICU doctor. Randomly enough, his life goal was to be a farmer. So it's a really good relationship. If my kids get sick, they go see him. If I want to go out of town, he's more than happy to feed the cows. So I give him my schedule of travel. We travel a lot. And he'll come over, take care of the cows. He's been there enough to know what to do. So for me, networking was huge. Like, you have to find somebody who's willing to do it and has the ability and time to do it, especially with livestock, because they have to be tended to every day.
I find it to be very hard. But I have children, so the season that is appropriate for me to travel is when they're in school. So vegetable farming, different types of farms, you have different types of schedules. So vegetable farming, and I guess Annie and Adrian can speak for themselves on that, but pretty much, like, I took a week off for spring break last week and I regret it. And so that's, pretty much after February, I'm like, nah. So there's a few precious months, but once you have a family, things do change. It gets harder.
Yeah, I'd say winter vacations. When I started the farm, I had this idea, like, oh, all these farmers that I've worked for, like, they work 7 days a week, and it's really important to take a day off, and I'm gonna prioritize that for myself, and then you realize, like, if you do take a day off, you spend the whole day thinking about what's happening back at the farm. It's really hard to turn the switch off. For me, it's easiest to take my time off in the winter when I don't have vegetables in production. However, that is also the time that I spend a lot of time doing, like, crop planning and crunching all my numbers and getting everything lined up so that when the season hits, I'm ready to go. So I have left in the middle of the season to go to people's weddings across the country. It just takes a lot of planning and a good support network. We're all here today at the end of April. It's starting to get into the busy season. It's just a matter of having a good team and preparing yourself ahead of time. But I would say once you make the commitment to care for plants or animals, you're in a relationship together, and it's like Kristen was talking about planting out in a dry soil and hoping, like, the rain comes. You feel a responsibility to keeping those lives alive, and so it does put some limitations on being able to leave the farm. But I would say, as I was driving away from my farm yesterday, I was excited to be coming here and to be talking to you guys and to come back to Syracuse and be back on campus. But it gets harder and harder because you love your farm so much, like, you want to be there. And it's maybe scary to think about tying yourself down in a way, but I look at it more as like you're rooting yourself in, and it's just a different thing than maybe when I was like 23 and I wanted to travel all over, and I'm really glad I had that experience. But I'm just like in a different phase of my life now where traveling is important, but it's not necessarily the most important thing anymore.
Yeah, so my schedule is also very tied to the academic calendar as well as to the farming schedule, which means that there's not a lot of off time. Usually the first week of January, I try and take a small trip, but I never feel like I'm tied to the farm in a negative way. Like that's someplace like I want to be, and I'm also teaching at Syracuse University and at my local community college, so I'm happy to stay on like this schedule. And it might be nice to be able to take time off to go to a wedding, but that doesn't necessarily always happen with the farming season.
More weddings in December.
Yeah.
Like, come on, people. Screw this June thing. Yeah.
Next question. Oh, on your.
I wanted to ask Adrian, were there agricultural policy issues that made you want to go into politics and run for public office? And in particular, is there stuff on the county level that you're interested in pursuing?
Yeah, so for the county level, I'm really interested in ag land preservation. So in my area, there's what I would consider some unplanned sprawl of development along some really prime agricultural area. And it's right in the valley along a main highway that there's kind of continuous building of different industry where really I see a lot more value in being able to keep the really high quality farmland as farmland. So it's kind of a hard balance to do at the county level because I want to see my local economy grow in all different ways, both agricultural and non-agricultural. And I was going around collecting all of my signatures to get on the ballot, and I was kind of practicing this speech of like, this is why I'm interested in politics. And I was telling someone after I knocked on their door, and they asked me the same question, what are you interested in? What are you going to do for us? And I was saying, well, I really want to protect our farmland. And as I was in the process of saying that, I realized that this person had just built their house on agricultural land, and I was just mortified. And at the same time, I was like, I wonder if they realize that this used to be a farm. And I don't think they did, which made the conversation less awkward. But it was just something that really made me think about how we conceptualize land planning in my area.
Next question. Tina? I do want to comment that, in some of the land planning classes I took, that the phrase is that farmland's last crop is houses. Mm-hmm. Tina?
You can take that.
I can't help but notice that you're all women, which I really love. And so I wanted to ask a question about that, how you're received as female farmers. If there's any kind of barriers, or if there are, what's it like in the farming community that we kind of envision as typically white and typically male?
I guess I'll start again. I was blessed to be raised with 3 brothers on a dairy farm. So work was work. It didn't matter which bathroom you went to. Work was work, and it meant if we had to unload, 20 loads of hay, you got on the wagon. So growing up, I never realized that girls were treated differently because I wasn't treated any differently than my 3 brothers. So I think when I came into the agriculture world, and I'm in the dairy and beef and, mostly animal agriculture, which is very male dominated, not so much now as it was, I would walk into a room with 100 men and 2 women, and I just walked in thinking that I was one of them. So I think the way I presented myself and my attitude towards the situation, I've never been looked at any differently. But I think with a woman, being a woman, we kind of had to, I always knew a little bit more. Like if you needed to know your facts, I needed to know them really, really well and a little bit better. And I don't know if I did that because that's my personality or because I was a girl, but it definitely helped. So that I also crop scouted for a long time for farms. So it was really interesting having men who had farmed for 50, 60 years call me on a Sunday and say, hey, this is my pest situation, what should I do? So I never saw it as a disadvantage, and I guess I'm blessed, and I blame my parents for that, which is wonderful because I was never treated any differently than the boys. And I now have a daughter whose name, oddly enough, is Elsa, which is a princess. And I said I would never raise a princess. And then Disney ruined it all. But so, even I think with me raising my daughter, I'm not going to raise her any differently than I raised my son. It's just work is work, and we all need to work together.
I'd speak for Alice and I. So we have a team of 3 women as leaders on our farm. And we definitely encounter a lot of the cliches of mansplaining. So I would agree with Erin that, anything that anybody is expected to know as a farmer, we have to have journal articles backing our knowledge. And so we do get a lot of people, so we're in an urban area surrounded on 3 sides by sidewalk and fence. We are so accessible. So we have a lot of people who stop by with great questions, and they see what we do, and our gender doesn't matter. And we have a lot of people who feel they read a Newsweek article about something, and so they know more about farming than we do. And they feel free to share that with us. But I think probably any profession experiences that. But I think there's some advantages to us, and something that has been nice that we've witnessed lately is a generational shift. And so we have a lot of young men and boys who come to the farm, and they don't know anything different. They don't know that that's not the norm for us to be the leaders and for us to be the people in charge. So, the older generation of people who come to visit our farm, we have lots of visitors, that's a hard thing, and they'll challenge us, or they'll try to, oh, you should ask so-and-so to do that for you, or so-and-so to build that thing that he's never built before, because he probably knows better than you. So we encounter that, and that's hard for us, and it does actually slow us down. And is an organization that receives donor support. It is a fine line for us to toe, actually, that we encounter the chauvinism. It is a true challenge, actually, and it does slow down our work because we have to work that much harder to prove our worth and our ability to do something. So that is hard for us. But on the flip side, we have people who feel more comfortable at our farm than they probably would feel at any other farm and environment. We have a very welcoming spirit there. So there is a different aura, I think, that we project at our farm that is maybe more inclusive than you'd have in, an all-male leadership team of people on the farm. And so a lot of people really value that, and they really see us as a resource. So we have to push against a lot of the chauvinism, but the flip side, there's a lot of great power to that is not intentional, but is a real gift for us.
I would say it doesn't come up a lot for me, other than every once in a while, when somebody sends in their payment for their CSA, they'll say something like, really excited to support a woman-owned business, which I think is awesome. And, the community in which I farm, I'm in a rural area, but still close to a city. So a lot of my customers are actually more urban and suburban, but I'm surrounded by other farms, and some of what you would think of as the traditional faces of farming, people who've been, farming for generations, and a lot of times those farms, the lead farmer is male, and I would say it hasn't been a problem for me. I think that most people are just happy to see more farmers coming back out on the land, and it gives us common ground, even though we may see things differently in a political light or other things. We have more in common than we don't, because we're all out working on our pieces of land. And the farm that I started on was run by a husband and wife team. And so I kind of got to see both perspectives and both management styles, and really learn there were some differences, and whether it was just those individuals or it was sort of a male perspective versus a female perspective, there were just things that the couple excelled out in their own way. And it just so happened that, yes, the husband liked to do the tractor stuff, and the wife liked to do more of the like management and sales side. But for me, since this has been my own business and I've been running it myself, I've kind of had to fill all of those shoes. And I have a tractor. I have a two-wheel tractor. I don't have a picture of it, but it's a walking tractor. Because I'm on such a small scale, and so I've had to teach myself that. That wasn't something that I necessarily learned growing up, and it's all possible if you're willing to sit down and look at the manual and ask people questions. And so there's been some like little comments, but I don't really let them get to me. Like, some people will be like, you operate the tractor? I'm like, yeah, I operate the tractor. Anybody can operate a tractor. I've been at the farmer's market and other vendors who are male, like, hey, sweetie, let me carry that table for you. And it's just like, I don't, you know what I mean? I don't think people mean to come off that way. And maybe I bristle at it because I'm like, I can carry a table. I picked all these vegetables and brought them here. I can carry the table inside. So there's maybe some minor things like that. But, most of the statistics that you read now, too, that look at women coming into farming, a lot of them are doing organic production. The trend is that there are more women-led farms coming into existence, and a lot of those tend toward a certain style of farming, which in my mind is all movement in the right direction.
Yeah, and to kind of build off that, a lot of these more niche farms, so if we consider from the USDA perspective, anyone growing vegetables would fall into that. But organic farming, vegetable farming, my farm also grows hemp, and we produce hemp for CBD oil. These kind of new markets allow more women to get into farming. So I feel some pushback from more of my more conservative neighbors, but I think a lot of the new market spaces are creating opportunities for women to become more involved with farming. And our crew is a whole spectrum of gender, and I think that has really benefited our farm to be able to have different perspectives and to be able to have our team be able to work together on things that they excel at, no matter what gender they identify as.
I will, if I can add something too, in my experience of going out and looking for grants or funding to help with farming, there are certain grants that are available to women farmers. So it is something that you can actually leverage to help get some assistance. And that's because, at a national level, some grant monies are allocated to try and actually widen the pool of diversity of farmers that we have out there, including more women.
My question's more about how comfortable you are taking on debt, or how much debt have you taken on, and how comfortable you are, or what does it mean if it's just infrastructure so you're getting a return later? Any of that, I'm just very curious.
So one of the things I say about when I moved home to Kentucky, I was living in Seattle at the time, and I packed my car, and I was like, I didn't even have a shovel, I just had my car with my belongings in it. I moved back to northern Kentucky, and I had saved some money. It took me about maybe $15,000 to buy my hoop house and to buy my refrigerator and to pay all my bills and buy seeds and get everything going before I ever got $1 back from selling my first radishes at the farmer's market. So I just put that number out there. It's going to be different from everybody, but luckily I had saved the money from working, and I didn't have student debt. When I was here at ESF, I worked as a teaching assistant, and so I was able to have a tuition waiver, and came out of that debt-free. The woman who works for me, it was a hard decision for her to start farming and leave her graphic design job because she has student debt. And I see that as a major hurdle. And then the next step for me would be buying land. And it's really scary because I don't make a lot of money as a farmer. And a lot of people want to sell their farmland for way more money than a farmer can afford because it could sell to developers for more money. And so that's been something I'm really wrestling with right now. Like, how much do I want to own my own land? There's a lot of reasons that I want to, because I want to invest in more infrastructure. And I want to be in a location for a long time so I can get some perennial crops in the ground, some tree crops. But it's difficult to take on that kind of debt knowing what my yearly income is. And I've been a little bit scared about like greenhouses and stuff like that. So it's really been like just building on what I can one step at a time.
And are you on a long-term lease, or is it?
I'm not.
Okay.
No, and like the situation that I keep running up against is like I find families that have inherited land that was in farming, and then that generation that's inherited the land is normally split between a few siblings that don't know what they want to do with their land. And so, yeah, they're happy to get rent money from me and see it be farmed, but they don't want to tie it up for a long time because they might want to sell it down the road. And like that situation has happened to me. I was on a piece of land for 3 years, and the siblings decided they wanted to sell it for more money than I could buy. And so I moved to another piece of land, and it's the same situation. And it's been really hard to find a landowner that wants to do a long-term lease with me, which is another reason why I want to buy. But I'm a little bit stuck in that cycle right now, and I feel like there's a big space where maybe some public policy could come in that's trying, recognizing that agricultural landscapes have a lot of value for the community, the social aspect of the community, but also the environmental impact that land has, to keep it a farm rather than have it go into some other land use. And so I would be happy to have a long-term lease from a person or an organization that their long-term goal is to keep the land in agriculture. But unfortunately, there are no nonprofits locally where I'm located that are doing that work right now.
I think a lot of it is personality too. My husband and I were raised very differently. I was raised on a farm. My husband was not. He was raised a little bit more upper middle class. I'll leave it at that. But I was raised on a farm where if it was broken, you fixed it. We still operate 600 acres. We don't have a tractor newer than 1984. So my father is the master mechanic. He can literally fix anything. Ask my kids. They joke that Pappy can fix anything. So if like stupid things break, he'll still fix them. So I came with that mentality that if it was broken, you didn't just get rid of it and buy new. You fixed it. My whole childhood was spent laying underneath a tractor, wrenching for my father at the age of 6 and 7 years old. Like, seriously. So we learned to become good mechanics. So debt scares me because I know that if I've got a piece of equipment, if you put maybe a couple $100 into it, it'll get you there. Debt scares me. Obviously, we had to buy our farm from my parents, so we do have the debt on the farm, and there's equipment we need, and there's equipment I want. The equipment want list is still wants. I need a tractor to feed hay in the winter. That's all I need for the beef cattle. So that's all I own. I own the farm and a tractor. But I think personality is a lot too. I just grew up not wanting debt. I never want debt. If you have equipment, my best advice is become a very good mechanic.
We've been a little bit more, we're more willing to lean into having debt to start the farm. So we did take out loans to be able to get the farm off the ground. We also had other sources of income to be able to support just our day-to-day livelihood. We looked at a lot of grants. So luckily, my partner and I are both fairly skilled grant writers and have been able to kind of leverage some of our equipment through both state and national level grants. And then also, as we've kind of been doing that, we've been scaling up the farm. So we've been taking on, we also have taken on investors with friends and family to be able to help us fund our operations. And at least at my firm, luckily my partner is more willing to lean into that debt, and he's more of a financial risk taker. So that's something that we've been able to access because he's willing to do that. And we've been able to scale up our firm to be able to have the equipment, to be able to have the facilities to process our CBD, to buy new tractors when we need them. And also for our land, it took us years to be able to even find the land that we're on now, because we started on 1 acre of greenhouses and have continued to scale up every year. So the land that we're on now is priced far too high to be able to warrant having a vegetable farm on it because of the housing development pressure in the area. And so we've chosen to have a lease with a farmer who is retired, and they are really fortunate, and we are fortunate to be in a position where they want to see that land be forever farmland. So they're looking into potentially having a land easement on it and keeping it forever farmland, but they don't have any immediate intentions to be able to sell part of it to us or to anybody else.
Who has the next question?
All right, first of all, I just want to thank all 4 of you again for being here. Having purchased beef from Lucky 13 Beef, okra from Brady Farms, and lots of veggies from Main Street Farms. I'm sorry, Annie, I haven't made it out to Kentucky yet.
A little far away.
I just see so much value in knowing where your food comes from and knowing all the hard work that goes into making it. So just going on that sort of a note, I want to ask you each about community and how community sort of impacts what you grow, influences who you look for, the markets that you pursue, and just the role of community in your operation.
I can start only because that our farm that is community centric, and so by the definition of the center that we work for, our goal is to serve our community in lots of ways. So being on the south side of Syracuse, we have a pretty diverse demographic of people, but it's very different eating habits than the people who tend to spend money on our CSA, which are more suburban and Caucasian consumers. So we try to make everybody happy, and it's kind of hard. But that's not, so as far as what we grow, we've diversified to try to make everybody happy. But the most important community impact is really our access and like being in the neighborhood. And again, drives Alice and I crazy, like how accessible we are because, all these visitors who come. You can tell I've had a lot of visitors this week. But what that has done, and so the role of our farm in the community, food access is part of our mission, but what has been more meaningful in my mind is when our neighbors look at something that used to be 6 acres of vacant property in a blighted neighborhood, and now they see vegetables growing. Now they see, wait a second, that's a thing I can do? That's a possibility in my neighborhood? That's a possibility in my city? Wait a second. And there is this instant transformation, and and I've had people tell us, I thought this was a bad idea, and now I can't imagine you guys not being there. So I think the value for our farm and for urban agriculture is as much about food access as it is about changing people's relationship with food and with the earth and what they think is possible. And that kind of sense of not just control over their own diet, but just seeing their city in a different way, seeing how people interact. We are a place where people come congregate. We never had people coming to congregate in that piece of grass. Now this is a place where people come hang out, and there is this community that came up just by existing. We didn't go out of our way. We just literally put down roots in the soil, and community grew out of that. So that's a really beautiful thing that we've experienced that has been passive. It's a very active thing. Like, it definitely like takes energy on our part, but I think has the most long-term impact, even more so than the food that we're actually growing and giving to the community.
If anybody's been to my farm, I'm very rural. I sit out in a whole lot of green space. My neighbors are mostly farmers, so they're not buying beef from me. So my direct community is a little bit different because that's not my market. So as a market, because I am a little bit of a niche market, I had to expand my community. So I consider my entire community Central New York at this point. My consumers are mostly upper middle class Caucasians, I'm not gonna lie. But for me, the community aspect is when I open the farm up and allow people to come see where their food is raised and see where how beef is produced. I do a lot of school tours. I do tours for nutritionists. I do dietitian tours, teacher tours. So to me, the greatest part of owning the farm is actually the public education, so that I can share what I have with others. And, you know, I've had a lot of tours of dietitians come in. Vegans, vegetarians, they come in kind of pouty, not real happy to be on a beef farm. You know, they clearly come in thinking that I'm this evil monster, truly. And then to see them walk in the pastures, interact with the cows, and leave with a completely different mindset, to me, that's what it's all about. So my community is extra large because I just want to share what we have with as many people who want to learn about it.
On my farm, I have a community-supported agriculture program, and part of that is entering into a relationship between the consumer and the producer, not only to know where your food is coming from, but to support a farmer. And on my end, I see it also as a relationship in which I'm educating people about agriculture that don't necessarily have direct contact with agriculture every day in their lives, aside from the food that they're eating. So one of the things that we do for the CSA is every week that the vegetables go out, they get a newsletter from me where I talk about what's happening on the farm. Maybe it's challenges, maybe it's successes, maybe it's just something I'm thinking about related to farming. Plus just information about the vegetables and ideas for how you could put them together into a meal. And the feedback that I've gotten from our CSA members is that they've tried things that vegetables they didn't even know existed before. They've learned a lot about seasonal eating, and it's impacted the way that they buy other food aside from the vegetables. And in addition to that, I have been partnering with some other farms around me to provide eggs or cut flowers. So some farmers that maybe don't necessarily want to adopt a CSA model themselves, but want to get their goods to market. I'm trying to help bring some of those things together and partner with other farms to get to the customers that already want to buy local vegetables and then also want to support other local farms too. For me, it's a model that really works well because it gives me that relationship with my customers and they're coming back week after week. They're paying up front at the beginning of the season, which is a hard time for me because I need to buy a lot of supplies and things to get my crops in the ground. But they're reaping the benefits of that in supporting my farm. And I also am in a rural area, so most of my customers are probably like 15 to 30 minute drive away from the farm. So one of the things that we do is we bring our vegetables to neighborhood pickup locations, so it's a little more convenient for people to pick up. But I also open up the farm a couple times a year for people to come out and buy plant starts. We do a picnic for our CSA members. We try to do some kind of like farm to table event, whether it's a brunch or a dinner or something, and allow people to come out and actually see where their food is grown and see the faces of the people who are growing their food. And, you know, to me, I have 50 members in my CSA, and if just like my one farm is impacting how 50 people are buying vegetables, like that, if you multiplied me by 10, you know, you'd be reaching 500. Like, I would really love to see that model spread more. And I think that there's also a role in farmers markets, having one-on-one connection with people at farmers markets, and even working with restaurants that are showing people how you can prepare local seasonal food too. So to me, that's the best way that I'm reaching out to the community. And I would say another layer, and what you're, I think, hearing from the panel is, like, most of us as farmers also see that there's another duty to go beyond just farming, whether it's like doing educational tours or working on public policy. I'm involved with a farmer support nonprofit that's trying to offer educational opportunities for farmers. So going beyond just strictly farming and realizing that if you want to see change in agriculture in your community, you have to go out and do other things on top of farming to kind of get the word out there. I mean, less than 1% of the population is growing food for the entire population. And so most people don't have contact with farmers every day or with agricultural lands. And so you have to kind of get in their faces to show that you are important.
I think there's no way that I can overstate how important my community is to my farm. We started off with 12 CSA members and have expanded from there, and 12 are mostly still CSA members. And now we have about 350 members. So being able to communicate with our area, with nonprofit groups, with government, with influencing policy has been hugely important. I think it's a lot of pressure to be able to put on someone who's also trying to farm. And I question how fair that is for farmers to have this additional social role of also providing all of these additional services on top of the already very difficult job of growing food. But it's something I feel really passionate about engaging with. So we host a lot of tours on our farm as well. We host school groups all the way from kindergarten to university level. We have our CSA members come to the farm a couple of times a year and have salad parties and to walk them around the farm. We talk at Rotary groups and all different kinds of community events. So being able to connect has been hugely important. And we're lucky that we're located just about a mile outside of the city of Cortland. So it's a pretty accessible location for people to be able to get there. So teaching and community engagement has been huge. We live in a pretty impoverished area, so one of the things that's been really important for us is to be able to make our vegetables more accessible to the extent that we can to people who aren't able to afford CSA in the beginning of the year. And as we've scaled up, we've been able to offer weekly payment methods for our CSA for customers who aren't able to make that big payment in the beginning of the season. And we also work with nonprofits to be able to provide subsidized CSA shares for people who can't afford the whole share by themselves. So that's been something that's important to us, to be able to engage with the part of the population that would otherwise be able to access the food that we grow, and for us to still be able to pay our employees a living wage.
Cool. So thank you all for being here. This is on, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So this is such a cool panel because I see such an awesome spectrum of agriculture, not just in terms of size, like scale and product, but also in this crazy American cultural divide between the urban and the rural. And so I guess I'm just kind of wondering how you see the relationship between each other. And when I say that, I don't mean on a personal level, though I get the sense that that's probably something pretty supportive. But just like in terms of the types of agriculture that are out there, how you see the relationship between the fields, and kind of how you position yourself and to what extent you have choice in the type of farmer that you want to be.
So one of my biggest complaints is farmers who don't support farmers. I actually write a monthly article for a Missouri Stockman magazine, and I think 2 articles ago was titled "Big or Small, We Must Love Them All." My big thing, because I'm animal agriculture, is if we start to fight amongst ourselves, my neighbor milks 4,000 cows. Love him dearly, not how I want to farm. I have 50 cows on grass. We farm very, very differently. if I'm gonna bash him, that leaves the door wide open for everybody to bash him. If everybody bashes him, he doesn't have a livelihood and his 50 employees don't. So in my opinion, whether you're organic, conventional, big, small, doesn't matter. You have to support each other within the community. I'm half certified organic for my crops. My cousin has a 300 cow certified organic dairy. My neighbor milks 4,000 cows conventionally. I love them all. Dairy rules where I live, not many beef guys. But again, I think whether you're a vegetable farmer on an acre or Brian Reeves, largest vegetable farmer in Onondaga County, you guys have to all get along. Because if you don't, you've kicked the door open for other people to dictate how you do things if they've never stepped on a farm. Animal rights activists to really, come in. So yeah, as a community, we have to support each other.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that sentiment. And I do, so one of the things specifically, like my group of teens this summer, we came out to Lucky 13. And that was a really important experience because I had teens who had literally never seen a cow like live before. Because you don't see a cow at a zoo, right? So they had never seen a cow. They're like, what is that moo? I took them out to go pick blueberries by her farm. And so I was able to call up Erin, I'm like, oh my God, they hear a cow mooing, can I come over? And yeah, and so we drove around, went and the kids had their fingers in the calf's mouth, and it was the greatest experience. But it was really valuable because it's not just grain crops, and it's not just meat, and it's not just vegetables. This is an entire food system, and so all our collective relationship with food, we have to be supporting all of these together. And whatever message that we're trying to deliver about the value of local food and agriculture to our customers and our neighbors, we want that to translate over to Erin's farm and to the other farms, and vice versa. If they value her beef and what it means for her to be a farmer, then hopefully they're going to value what that means back to us. And I'd also add too, as far as ESF students out there, to be inspired in agriculture, there's things that aren't just about cows and aren't just about vegetables, that are other ways you can be involved in agriculture that translate across these different fields. And, you could be studying shrub willow or some other kind of thing like that. And those types of forms of research and data collection and science, and all of us have this science background that is really cool, and we use it, but not in a conventional way. We're not using it like we thought we would do when I went into forest ecology, but I am using that on my farm when I look at my soil chemistry and trying to rehabilitate things, and how can I use wood chips and mushrooms together to get better organic matter. You're able to use those things. So there's cross-disciplinary stuff across different types of agriculture and scales of agriculture. So there's my 2 cents.
I absolutely agree with what both of you have said. And yeah, where I farm, there aren't that many organic vegetable farms, and I'm not even certified organic. And there are people within my wider region that are certified organic, or are doing it different ways than I do. The scale that I'm at was kind of just dictated by what was the land that was available in the region that I live. There's not that much flat land for growing vegetables, but that's what I knew how to grow. So it's kind of let me figure out how I can grow as many vegetables as I can on a small acreage. But I see the need for larger farms. I mean, I have people wanting to get cases of broccoli from me all year long. I'm I don't have the right size farm for that. I would love for there to be some 30, 40 acre farms in my region that could provide that for the people that want to buy that locally. And the conventional produce farmer down the road for me came over and helped me plow up a new area of my field, or let me put stuff in his fridge when my fridge broke one day. We're all here to support each other, and just because he chooses to farm one way and I choose another doesn't mean that we have a ton of common ground, even though he may be using some chemicals and I'm not, so absolutely, we just need more farmers. And we can get down into the nitty-gritty details of that down the road. But to me, one of the big dangers is losing more farms and losing more farmers. So whatever we can do to get people out on the land and keep some agricultural landscapes as agricultural landscapes is the most important thing.
Yeah, in my graduate research, I spend a lot of time looking at the ag census data and thinking about what kind of farms are in the United States right now. And kind of coming from that perspective, I see that our food system needs all types and sizes of farms. So just thinking about all having organic doesn't meet the needs of our food system, or all having small plots doesn't meet the needs of what our consumers need. So we need to have a variety of price points, a variety of products, differentiated products, all within our food system to be able to make that work. And so I think it's great that we're able to, kind of engage in our own styles that we prefer in agriculture. And also to be able to think about how we can reduce the barriers to entry for farming. Because there's a lot of barriers to entry. Being able to have a support network, being able to have the financial resources, being able to have the know-how to farm is really challenging. And so the things that we can do to kind of engage with that and overcome some of those barriers so that more people who want to can become farmers.
Time for one more question. We have time for one more question. What's that question? Who has that final question?
The other farmer in the room.
No, well, I guess my Lord and Savior, Chris Blanchard, in that way, like, what would you tell your beginning farmer self if you could talk to them? Like, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give your beginning farmer self?
Patience. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's probably going to cost you more than you think it is, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You have to be prepared for that, because sometimes when you get hit with a blow, if you think that something's going to cost $1,000 and it's going to cost $2,000, you can't get discouraged. To me, the agriculture community is the most resilient there is. If you've been watching what's going on in the Midwest with cattle farms, they've lost millions of cows. Some farms lost their entire ranches. And they interview the owners, and they're like, we're farmers, we'll figure it out. So the best advice is patience, and you'll figure it out. Don't get discouraged.
That's a hard question to answer, and I think maybe the thing that I've learned the most over the past 6 years is, this starting a farm was my dream, and the way that it looks and the way that I'm doing it was my dream. And I think that now I realize that I can't do it all myself, and letting go and delegating and realizing that I had to learn everything from somebody else at the beginning, and allowing people that work for me or friends and family that want to help to actually do some things on the farm is a good thing. So I think maybe just telling myself that I need to lean on people more is something that I continually learn, and that can give me some room to breathe and enjoy farming. And that's one thing that sometimes you get a little bit caught up in the day-to-day and the to-do list that never gets finished. And to remind yourself that you actually do accomplish a lot, and to not forget that, and to take a minute to enjoy being out on your farm, and not worrying too much about being late on getting deliveries out the door or whatever.
It took me a long time to learn how to ask good questions. So being able to learn how to find the resources that I need and be able to communicate with people who were experts was intimidating for me at first. To be able to ask somebody to take the time to give me a tour of their farm to see how they set up their land or how they set up their drip irrigation system was definitely a big barrier for me. And so learning how to ask those questions, to reach out and do that in a way that I really found people were really willing to help. My community was really supportive, and I was eventually able to go to a lot of different farms to think about and have them explain to me how they were farming. So I think if I had a little bit of a more early jump on being open to asking questions and being less afraid of feeling like I was going to be seen as incompetent as I was just learning how to farm.
Alice hears from me all day long, so I don't really have a good response.
I'll add to that also that farmers are generally farmers because we love it, not because necessarily it's going to make us rich. So because we love it, we love to geek out and talk about it. So ask questions. Like Adrian said, I mean, we're all like, we geek out on farming. So people stop by the farm. I love to have questions asked. Whether it's somebody who wants to become a farmer or somebody who just has questions. So definitely ask the questions because we all do it because we love it. And anything you're passionate about, you're generally more than happy to talk about. So definitely ask the questions.
I guess I would just add in general, just make sure you love it. You know, it's worth it if you love it because it's really, really hard and it's really, really expensive. But so if you don't really love it, maybe it's not the best thing to do, but there's probably a lot in there that you love that you don't even know yet.
That was a great question, actually. We do actually have time for one more. Did someone in the front row have their hand up a moment ago?
Remember, ask the questions. Come on, people.
I thought you had your hand up.
I didn't, but I thought of something. I'm curious about your guys' future goals. Where do you guys see yourselves in like 5-10 years, maybe?
That's a tough question because for me, I'm kind of locked into how much acreage I can own. I'm surrounded by 1,000-cow dairies that spend a lot of money, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 an acre to plant corn. I can't pay that for land to grow beef on. It'll never pay me back. So for me, I would just like to continue at my scale, just build a better customer base, and be able to offer more tours, and educate more people and get more people out to the farm. You know, if it were up to me, I'd like to have a group at the farm every week, you know. I just want to get more word out there on how food is raised. The more people who know where their food comes from, you know, they'll spread the word. But at this point, we're all 3 to 4 generations removed from the farm. So for me, land-based wise, I really can't grow anymore, but I'd like to continue what I'm doing and do it well.
Yeah, this isn't my home territory, and it's not my husband's home territory either. But we've been in Syracuse for 13 years, so this is the longest I've lived somewhere other than, you know, my birthplace. So I'm very rooted here. Our farm has this ability to do so much in the community in different ways, looking at lots of different community development type of opportunities. I really want to see that stuff. You know, I want to. And then, you know, it's been a tough week, and sometimes, like, I just want my own farm, and I just want to homestead on my own, and I just want to, you know, figure out what I can do on my own. But it is a hard question. You know, I see myself still doing, hopefully, what we're doing, but in a much richer, deeper, and expanded way. But in the reality, my husband's a postdoc and needs another postdoc, and I don't know where our family's future lies, you know, so, and not having the benefit of this being like, we don't have babysitters. We don't have, you know, they're my farmer coworkers, they come and help me out. So not having a family base really changes what you can do, because it is so time consuming. So there's definitely a draw to find family near, you know, to where we really, really settle down into farming. But the reality is, like, this is our home. You know, I've made this my home. I've made this my community. And so hopefully we'll get to continue, but just doing it in a deeper way.
I would like to grow more than just vegetables. I would love to grow some perennial crops. I'd like to have animals. What's held me up on doing that is just that I'm in a year-to-year lease situation, so annual crops make sense for that situation. So I would love to find a piece of land or get into a long-term lease where I could focus on those things. But I've never really been a 5 to 10 year planner. I mean, I didn't have any plan on becoming a farmer, but I found it and I love it and I want to keep doing it as long as I can. And I would say, you know, one of the hard parts of farming is just like financially making it work. I mean, 100% of my income comes from farming. And so it can be really tough sometimes. And I make it work on a budget, but I would like to be in a more comfortable situation where I'm not so worried that like one disaster could wipe me out financially. So I've been really trying over the first few years of farming to like be a good farmer and learn how to good crops and like grow good crops and find my market. And now I'm like, how do I like optimize so that I'm growing really good produce, I'm not exhausting the land doing it, I can sell them, and I can also like feel a little bit more financial stability.
One of my early passions in life was for land restoration. And then when I was in my undergrad, I found agroecology, and so kind of looking at how our farm systems fit into the broader landscapes. And so it's been a really a personal passion for me to think about how I want my land to look and how I can make that fit into the larger ecology. And so one of my long-term goals, and maybe it's a little bit longer than 10 years, is to do a lot of land restoration and looking at hedgerows. So looking at how we can shape our farm to have a farmscape that fits within our ideology of having alley cropping, having diversified hedgerows, having different types of plants on the farm that are going to attract beneficial insects, and doing a lot of tree planting. So that's one of my goals kind of outside of the business scope, is to be able to think about that farmscape.
Sorry, I feel bad asking a more specific question ending on that kind of note. But this question is more kind of geared towards the farmers who provide to third-party people such as restaurants or whatnot, and not just kind of their own local farmers markets. But what is kind of that relationship like with those restaurants, and what are some challenges that you face with providing to them, and kind of what areas of opportunity do you see in kind of strengthening that relationship in a more business sense?
The first restaurant clients I had, I met at the farmer's market. I knew the first year that I farmed that I was gonna have some failures and some successes, and I didn't want to like promise anything to a CSA at that point. So whatever looks good, I'll take it to the market. And I met some chefs one-on-one that way and started just sending out a weekly fresh sheet to them, saying what I had on the farm and what was available, and delivering to the restaurants if they weren't too far away. And just through those people telling other chefs about it, I grew more clientele. And I still have a handful of restaurants that I work with one-on-one, like that I have a direct relationship with the chef. But a couple years ago, in the greater Cincinnati area where I farm, a new business popped up that is kind of a food hub that is sort of a middleman that connects farmers to chefs. And so I can put any inventory that I have on their online system, and chefs from all over the city can go on and order, not only from my farm, but other farmers. And the food hub puts a markup on it to pay for their services, but that's really greatly increased the number of restaurants that I've been able to reach. And so that's been a very valuable service, working with that food hub particularly. I was lucky to have worked on 2 farms that sell to restaurants, so I kind of had already in mind the kind of like quality that restaurants were looking for, and I knew how to walk into a kitchen and talk to a chef because I had done that delivering vegetables for the other farms that I worked with. But it is a different customer, they're looking for things to be sent to them in a different way necessarily than you would display it for a farmer's market or send it to a CSA customer. And so there's just sort of like a learning curve on how to do that. But it's half of my business is to restaurants and half is to my CSA. So it's a huge part of what I do. And it's actually been much more profitable and lucrative for me to work with that clientele than to keep going to the farmer's market, because when I was going to the farmer's markets, I'd come home with a lot of stuff, especially if it was a rainy day and it was an outdoor market. And picking for harvesting for restaurants and CSA is like, everything's already sold. Like, you're just picking what they ordered, so there's no waste of labor there. So to me, it's a part of my market that I want to continue to work with.
I sell beef to only one restaurant, and the reason is, there's a few reasons. Number one, I don't do farmers markets. I do direct to the consumer. I have a pickup date. I pick up the beef from the butcher. It's frozen. I don't have holding space. You have to pick up at my house that day. So there's a learning curve there. But with restaurants, I need to get X number of dollars per pound, and restaurants don't want to buy at retail. You can't blame them. So price point is difficult. The one restaurant I do sell to buys at retail pricing. Second drawback is freezer space. My product is frozen. Most restaurants do not have an on-site freezer that can hold an entire cow or a half a cow. So that's number two. Number three is a restaurant wants to run a ribeye special. Say they're going to sell, if they purchase a whole cow, there's only X number of ribeyes on a cow. So they're going to sell 24 steaks and then they're done and have 500 pounds of ground beef left over. So it's kind of a inventory issue. So the restaurant I do sell to, they're a burger joint. They pull out primal cuts, the really good cuts, the really good steaks. They grind everything else into hamburger. So they run a whole lot of hamburger specials. They're known for their hamburgers. They can jack the price up, so they don't mind paying a retail price for meat. But with a perishable product, it is difficult to sell to restaurants, especially if your margins are pretty tight. I would love to sell to more restaurants, but I can't undercut myself to supply a restaurant when I've got customers that would pay retail pricing.
So the way that we've worked with restaurants has really changed over the last 8 years. So some of our first customers, along with those a few CSA members, were restaurants and grocery stores just in our area. And they were pretty small orders, but they were really important to our business at the time. Because even if it was just like a case of lettuce, like it meant a lot to be able to get our name out there and to be able to have those sales. And as we've scaled up, we've really seen a change in the types of restaurants and with the chefs that we're able to work with, because now it's more difficult to justify working with a chef that only wants like a couple of bunches of radishes to be able to justify going out and picking them and then delivering them. So now we've kind of shifted a little bit away from those smaller customers and looking at some larger chains that are in the New York City area, and we cross-stock with a food hub. So looking at those intermediate markets to help us move our food to people who are who want that and can afford those prices. I think with all of those intermediate markets, with all of those grocery stores and with the restaurants, it's really values-based. Like, we're not going to be able to compete with prices for Cisco or any other large distributor. So those customers have to be engaged with what we're doing. They have to understand our story and be able to be willing and able to afford to buy from local farms.
Yeah, we just have one restaurant that we work with regularly, and they've been great because like, he just came out to the farm 2 days ago and said, oh, sure, we'll try that, or have you thought about that? And that's been, for us, learning. That has been an important relationship, having a chef willing to walk alongside with us and to kind of get over this learning curve, because he wants to know how to incorporate local food better, and he's kind of figuring it out, and we're figuring it out. So we were lucky to have a chef who wanted to do that with us and who values our community mission. But I haven't figured out the magic formula for working with restaurants yet.
All right, well, thank you all very much. I want to first thank the panel. Thank you all for being here this evening. I appreciate it. And I'd like to thank Kristen and Mark for being down here earlier and for making the trek. If you have a continuing interest in agriculture, make sure that you connect with your colleagues and your peers here on campus. Also, be sure to reach out to the resources that we have in our faculty. So Teresa Selfa in the, thank you, in environmental studies. Also Matt Pottiger in LA, Monica Blaisdell in environmental science. You're in 207, I think. Teresa, what's your office number? 211 Marshall. Monica is in 207 Baker. Also Terry Ettinger in the top floor in the greenhouses in Illick. So all of these individuals stay in touch with, and as I think some of you were alluding to, I think Adrian, it was you about asking questions. Absolutely seek people out, ask questions, gain insight, find summer experiences on any of these farms, any other farms, get a sense of whether you do love it. And even if you can't see yourself maybe being a farm owner, there are so many other ways to be engaged in the food system, in food streams, in agriculture, ancillarily or indirectly. So if you have a passion for food, if you have a passion for changing how we provide food and consume food, how we educate around food, there's a place for you. So be engaged, ask questions. And finally, I'd like to thank one other person who I didn't thank earlier. We often have partners, and those partners help make things happen, but it's also our staff that helps us. And I'd like to recognize Jake O'Connell because he works with me. Jake works with me, and that inherently means getting sucked into whatever crazy insanity I've cooked up on any given day, and he's there 100% side by side, and so I really appreciate all of your work and effort. Jake, thank you. Cool, so we're done, but if the panelists are willing to stay informally, I would encourage everyone to kind of mingle, and otherwise have a wonderful night. Have a great end of your semester, and we are hopeful that this conversation will keep going in some ways on campus, and we look forward to being a participant in that conversation as well. Take care.